We are diving into some recruiting rankings, and maybe we'll circle back, Tony, if you've got anything on the recent commits or the Justin Hill commitment announcement today. But what I wanted to see here was obviously the average player ranking. So what I was starting to address is you always see that outlier or two schools during the summer. Like a Rutgers, I think, was number 12 here recently, but it's kind of bolstered by numbers and not necessarily quality, and then they quickly drop to where they're supposed to be. On the flip side, what's impressive about Ohio State is as soon as I heard Steve, you say 23 commits most likely coming today, I thought, okay, I'm sure their average is exceptional, but it is basically number one in the country. Now, if you go down the average player ranking, it is not technically number one in the country. You got LSU at 94.01, which is a smidge ahead. But as you guys know as well as I do, it's going to be difficult for LSU with only 12 commits to maintain that kind of average with another 10 or 12 players coming into the class. So, despite the losses, and maybe I'll start you out here, Tony, because what was as much the talk around Ohio State recruiting circles this week, in addition to the commits, were the guys that were missed that both headed to Eugene, Oregon. Dorian Brew, of course, the cornerback, and then you've got Jordan Davison, the running back, and a lot of Buckeye fans not real happy about that, and going to a conference rival now.
Well, and we may be adding Trey McNutt to that one as well, the Ohio safety who could end up at Oregon. But that's life in the NIL era, and that's life in the common era now with the way Oregon has been, the brand that has been built since Joey Harrington and Keely Smith that has continued to grow, and it's in a healthy place now. And Ohio State can't just expect to sweep up the Big Ten, and they've been able to do that in the recruiting rankings for basically the last 20 years, 25 years or so, and now they're going to have to work a little bit harder. The thing that's interesting to me is the in-state stuff. You would like to lock that down as they always would, and I don't know if you guys. There's a little bit of Alabama buzz right now with Justin Hill, so I don't know if that's going to be something we'll need to watch, but see if that comes to fruition. But the average star rankings or the average recruiting rankings, Ohio State normally does pretty good at that. Top 3, top 4, sometimes the number 2 with the Georgia or Alabama, who's ever leading at that point. But it is interesting to watch Oregon come in and be what Michigan hasn't been able to be in terms of recruiting, and what Penn State hasn't been able to be. It'll be interesting to see if USC can get there. Now, they've lost a bunch of guys from the Southeast from decommitting, so they've got this. They cast a net and they catch some fish, but they lose them on shore, and so we'll see how USC does. But I think it's going to be Ohio State, Oregon battling in the recruiting rankings for the foreseeable future, or at least until Dan Lanning takes the Cowboys job after this year.
Do you think that Ohio State, having gotten commitments from what is it, 3 of the top 4 cornerbacks in the nation, something in that range, something ridiculous, could have made Dorian Brew reconsider?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And there are some that believe he's more of a safety than a corner anyway. And so, yeah, you've got the top 2 corners committed in Devin Sanchez and Naeem Offord, and Dorian Brew becomes number 3. And so you go, do I want to be number 3 or do I want to be number 1? And you can ask the same question of Jordan Davison. Do I want to be the 3rd running back commit, or do I want to be number 1 at Oregon? Do I want to be the guy at Oregon? And so you've got some timely situations for the Ducks. They've been able to come in and grab some guys. I wonder what would happen if Brew hadn't moved to Texas. If he had stayed in Ohio, would he be committed to Ohio State at this point? But again, it's not like they've locked Ohio down completely in the top 5. And they'll still be recruiting Trey McNutt. They'll still be going after him and trying to get him there. But you can't recruit enough defensive backs. I think with the the Dorian Brew thing. It kind of reminds me of the Javen Boggs decommitment receiver who was committed to Ohio State for a while, decommitted. He said, I want to go where I'm needed, not wanted. Ohio State for receivers. They want receivers right now. They don't necessarily need them. Other places need receivers. And so I think Dorian Brew, go where you're needed, not wanted. Ohio State doesn't necessarily need him. They just obviously wanted him. But you get a better shot at playing at corner at Oregon, in his opinion.
Another angle to this kind of a new battle that's being waged with NIL being a component involved, although we do see the same cast of characters at the top of the recruiting rankings. Even it's not like Louisville is surged out of nowhere and is suddenly a recruiting giant or something. I think a lot of people were anticipating that. My thought going into all this was, well, the same schools that have the resources to build all the fancy facilities, it's probably the same schools that are going to have the resources to transition to this era. And I know it's not an exact transition, but what I was getting to was there's this thought out there among other college football fan bases. They criticize Ohio State and a few others that, well, once Quinshon Judkins walked in the door and Will Howard and Caleb Downs, well, they're buying a team, although they're still recruiting in the top 2 or 3 and 4 in the country, and that there's this arms race between Ohio State and Oregon, and then this gives more credence to that, a number 1 ranking here for Ohio State, and then Oregon picking up 2 prime prospects this week.
Well, everybody wants to throw shade at everybody else. Ohio State is buying its team. Well, Oregon bought Bo Nix. Washington bought Michael Penix. And Washington ends up in the national championship game. And Oregon, was just as good. We saw those games between those teams. They were right there with them. And Oregon's bringing in, Dylan Gabriel this year. They bought him. So everybody is buying players. Your team's buying players. Our team's buying players. Their team's buying players. Just go buy the best players you can get is kind of it's 2024. And this is the landscape now. What was, and what is today is what is today. And what can I say? I mean, that's just the weight of it is. And everybody is going to have X amount of dollars to commit to personnel in this new paradigm. And that's Alabama could be upset about it that Ohio State bought, 3 of their best players, but, go out and take 3 really good players away from Auburn or Georgia or Florida or whoever, Florida State. I mean, everybody can has the same ability to do it. It's just, do kids want to play at your school? That's what it kind of comes back to, and how much money you could spend.
I'm just looking at On3's transfer portal rankings, and it looks like they also incorporate your losses. So Ohio State has like the number 51 transfer portal rankings, which puts them at 7 or 8 in the Big Ten. But they brought in 8 guys. Caleb Downs chose Alabama over Ohio State, so that was a top 2 thing. Will Howard as a quarterback, you're a free agent now. Where are you going to go look? Oh, Ohio State doesn't have a starting quarterback. I mean, that's a no-brainer. The only surprising one, I think, is Quinshon Judkins choosing to go to a place with a running back. Although at that point, there's probably a safe assumption that Travion Henderson was leaving for the NFL. So you're looking at Ohio State like there's nobody there. And even if there is somebody there, Quinshon Judkins has had to carry the load for 2 years straight. But he's also been able to split the load at times, but he gets a lot of carries. So him getting 100 fewer carries than he did last year and the year before that, I don't think is a bad thing for him. He can be a 1-2 punch or a 1-1 punch. Will Kazmarek, as I've said before, when he came over from Ohio, nobody cared. People laughed when Will Howard came in. It's like, ha, you're stuck with Kansas State's quarterback. People only really started getting angry, I think, with the just Julian Sayin thing. Then it was like, what the heck, But that's another guy. If there was no Quinn Ewers committed to Ohio State, that created a situation, or Dylan Raiola rather, that created a situation where Julian saying ended up at Alabama. He was always very interested in Ohio State, but he chose Alabama, and Ohio State was right there. And so you lose Nick Saban. Who do you turn to? You turn to the team that you had the best connection with, and it was Ryan Day, and it wasn't Kalen DeBoer. So it's also about connections as much as money, because there are a bunch of players Ohio State missed out on that they wanted. They got the guys that wanted to come to Ohio State, and they supplement their roster, and you can't buy a championship, but you can purchase the components to give yourself a really, really good chance. And as I'll keep saying, this is the most difficult championship that anybody is going to win this year. It's never going to be more difficult. It has never been more difficult than it will be this year. So whatever it takes to get it done, I would consider it money well spent, because it's going to be unlike anything we've ever seen. It's going to be the toughest road that anybody has ever had to take. And so you got to get there as best you can with as best a team as you can to give yourself as best an opportunity and chance to win it all.
Well, the dynamics of the math is a bit interesting, because Ohio State was roughly making the playoffs. Well, not roughly. I think they were making the playoffs half the time. And now they should be making the playoffs 95% of the time. And therefore, your entry into the shot at the national championship is much easier. But once you get there, it's a 3 or 4 game gauntlet. So you can look at it both ways. But I would agree. Yeah, this is going to be more difficult. Yeah,
it's easier to get there, but it's tougher to. Good luck once you get there, and it's much more difficult this way than it was for Jim Tressel, Urban Meyer, Woody Hayes, who won a national championship before he even played in a bowl game. I mean, it's a completely different world now than it was anytime before.
Wayne Taylor,
thank you. Just Steve, listening to Urban Meyer talk about going through the gauntlet that they had to in 2014 or whatever, like his team would have died if they had to play one more game. They never would have been able to do it because of the physical toll on everything. And, having to play another 1 or 2 playoff games after that. I mean, it sounded like an impossibility just a handful of years ago.
I've been messing around with these realignment models here this week. So our tact here at the Voice of College Football is we're not ones that throw crap at the fan and just talk realignment all the time and all these speculations all the time. Number one, there's got to be news. Number two, there's got to be somebody who said something that could be configured as news, somebody in some authoritative capacity. So other than that, we're having fun with realignment models. You get these leagues up to a certain number that are being projected here. Once we get into the 20 to 24 range, and it's going to be difficult to configure a league where you don't need to have a mini playoff, a semifinals within the league to determine at least a valid champion. You can do it. You can just line them up 1 through 24 and have a crazy tiebreaker system. But shoot, we've seen with all the speculation of what a 3-way tie could have looked like the last couple of years with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, where you're knocking down tiebreakers to where you're splitting first down totals between the teams, and you would be looking at that kind of situation that you almost have to play a mini playoff within your conference to determine who gets to the playoffs. Or wins a conference championship, which is going to be meaningless going forward. It's just I don't know what they're going to do. Eliminate a game during the regular season?
Well, what's crazy about that is, now you've got up to 4 games in the playoff, and now you want to have a 2-game Big Ten playoff too, where maybe the top, let's say it's a 20-team league, and maybe you play 9 games in division, and maybe 1 crossover opponent from the other division for 10 league games. And then the top 2 teams in each division play each other to decide their division. And then the 2 winners play for a championship game. Now you've added another game for these guys somewhere on the schedule to play. And, maybe you do that as I don't know, as I'm thinking out loud, maybe that becomes the 12th game on everybody's schedule is Big Ten wild card in week 12. that, you have that playoff and, I don't know, maybe that's how it goes.
I think you can do that, and I've said it before. You do it just like they did it in 2020, where everybody played championship weekend. You make
And
that
everybody else
12th
got
game.
matched up. Yeah, everybody
You
else
make
got matched up.
the 9th Big Ten game is the semifinal the semifinal, and then the 5 plays 18 or whatever the hell it is at that point, and you just pair everybody up that way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really create anything else. It creates a fluid schedule, which I think is interesting. I think you're gonna eventually, you can make money on a conference semifinal game, more money than you can on Indiana Purdue or something like that. All of these different rivalry games. But then again, the rivalry game moves up a week. The rivalry week moves up a week. But I think you can, if that's what you want to do, and that is a scenario like how can we get a semifinal? You can just create a fluid week in that 12th game of the season, because they did it in 2020. Yeah. We learned a lot of things in 2020. Yep. Things can be now. No, there are no fans, so that made it easier. But I mean, fans. I to say we can't do it, I think that's false and lazy.
The 18-team league actually makes it work, because you could play nine regular season Big Ten games against everybody in your division. Well, would that be? You'd have 2 9-team divisions. You could play 8. You could play the other 8 teams, and then have the semifinal as the 9th game, or the wild card games for everybody else, and still play 3 non-conference games at the beginning. So, I mean, this is a perfect scenario to do it the way they've got it set up now. If they wanted to, I don't know what the clamor is for that. Certainly, the league splits up almost perfectly with, I think it would be maybe Illinois in the Eastern Division, and the Eastern time zone teams would be 9, and then the rest of the Central and Pacific Coast teams would be 9 on the other side. So perhaps that's a way they could do it.
I don't think we're going to go back to divisions.
Probably not.
Which is then it becomes like, well, what do you don't probably need the semifinal things, but it's like if it creates another game that if the networks want it, they'll get it. Basically, I think is the answer to every question that we have, every scenario that we have. Would the networks like it? Then it'll happen. If the network's like, yeah, no, we're good without it, we don't have room for it, then it becomes not necessary.
So, Tony, thank you so much for shedding light on how stupid I've been this week, because I completely forgot about that. I've produced, I don't know how many videos, and we saw it on 2020, and I love that, because I'm the nerd that will enjoy that. Oh, Purdue's going to play Maryland at noon on Saturday. I'll catch some of that game. And I would love the semifinals actually to not be played back to back. I think I would like a Friday, Saturday. But regardless, what's funny about this is that either you're going to have, let's say, 2 10-team divisions as you guys lined up, and that you're playing 9 teams in your division and you're never playing anyone in the other division. That's one scenario. Or even if you play one team with a 10-game conference schedule, or this wild card, which is going to be completely random, of course, especially for the teams that aren't going to make this 4-team semifinal. After the league just sold us on this new scheduling formula and how balanced it is, and everyone's going to see everyone at least one every 2 years, that suddenly Ohio State could never see Minnesota, or see them once every 10 years, I guess.
Yeah. Just gives me a headache thinking about it.
It gives you a headache, Steve. It gives me content ideas.
I go back to that whole thing again. It was the 90s. I think they combined like all the minor league teams out on the West Coast in one 16-team league, and it lasted 5 years because, the bottom half of that league was getting their brains beat in, and there was no hope and no money for them, and it fell apart. Plus, as Ryan Day said, I kind of ambled up to him on the sideline at one of the camps, and it's like, how are the Big Ten meetings out in LA? And he said, you put 16 people in a room, you can't get people to agree on anything. And that's part of the problem. I think what's going to happen is ultimately the presidents and the athletic directors are going to look at anybody who raises a stink about this and say, this is our budget. And this, that big check they give the guy at the end of the golf tournament is what the Big Ten gives us. And you need to make it work out because, we ain't going back there. So we're not going back to 1/3 the money from the Pac-12. So that ain't happening. So that's where it's at.
David Greenshield's comment here about Jim Harbaugh having a losing record against Ohio State reminds me of a shorts idea that I have. Not shorts actually that you put on, but folks, YouTube shorts idea that I have, because that's the way to build a channel, folks, apparently, is to produce these shorts constantly, which I don't do. But I want to ask everyone in the audience as I produce this short, and I will be reciting the Ohio State-Michigan series record during my lifetime, that I want everyone in the chat to comment back, what is the series record during your lifetime? That's simply, there's going to be no lean, no opinion, just simply I want that response from everyone.
I don't know, Mark. I see quite a few 3-year-olds in there, so I think you'll see some 3-0s in there. I will say, it took Jim Harbaugh 7 years at Michigan to beat Ohio State. So, I mean, things take time. There are ebbs and flows, and again, it's a rivalry. Nobody owns it. Anybody should be able to win it, and it can go from place to place, year to year. And the bluster is part of the fun, even if it doesn't seem like it sometimes for some people.
Well, Tony, with Justin Hill coming in today for that decision, you shed some light on possibly Alabama making a move there. I think a lot of people had Justin Hill penciled in as a Buckeye, but we shall see here in just about 65 minutes. Between Maxwell Roy, you got Trajan Odom coming in here, Brody Lennon, the tight end, in-state. Any thoughts about any of those guys?
Well, I think if you can land Justin Hill, this is a very, very, very good defensive end class. I think it would be like 4 guys in the top 135 among defensive ends, and they need that because they've missed on some guys. But overall, the defensive line class is looking pretty good, and they're not done yet. They're going to try to continue working on Malik Autry, who's committed to Auburn, who's a big nose tackle and very close to some other members of the Ohio State recruiting class. But I like Brody Lennon. Kind of reminds me of Jake Stoneburner back in the day, his high school highlights, an athletic guy who can run, but will need to get bigger like every tight end, except for maybe Jelani Thurman that comes to Ohio State. It takes him a little time to size up. But the camp offers are always interesting, and coaches get a firsthand look. They're putting them through the test. These are kind of the job interview that you have to nail. And so when you nail it, I think that means something. Sometimes it means you've missed on some guys nationally, so you have to offer some guys in state, and that happens as well. But I think the defensive line class is pretty good at this point. Could get better today, and could get better moving forward. But overall, it's June, or now it's July, and we talk about this every year when we have Notre Dame fans in the chat last year and the year before talking about Notre Dame's #1 class in June in the summer. It doesn't mean anything right now in terms of who is leading right now. It will not most likely generally isn't leading in December, and certainly not in February. I think it is very interesting, however, how Alabama has already jumped out front to where they are, and it's different than what Nick Saban used to do. Like Nick Saban at this point in the past would be like 14th, and then you just wait until November, December when they start shooting up the rankings and everybody else starts to drop back a little bit. I don't expect Ohio State to have the #1 class just because it's never happened. They've had #2 a couple of times, so I think if you can get David Sanders, that's going to help, and if you can keep your guys in state, that would help as well. But I'm part of the I'll believe it when I see it. Now they may have the best average ranking of recruits, but leading leading this early, I think, is kind of like a lot of other races. Maybe you're, do you want to be leading this early in the Kentucky Derby type of thing, or do you want to come from, a little ways back and conserve your energy?
And I know we've had this conversation before. It doesn't matter necessarily. We don't know until the guys actually get on the field and start playing, and we can reevaluate them. If you're number 1, you're number 4, you're number 3, just so you're in the running. But do you think there's any value to finishing number 1 beyond the actual football players on the field and how good the class is to show Ohio State is the number 1 recruiting class in the country?
Yeah. Well, Steve, Urban Meyer used to say, "Hey, they're keeping track of it. We might as well win it. Like their rankings, we want to win it." So there's value in that. There's bragging rights. There's just the idea that everybody has done their job, and you can tout that. And then so much of this stuff is about social media and trying to build this snowball effect. So I think there's a positive. I don't know how tangible on the field it is, other than the fact that if you've got the class that is actually ranked number 1 after the fact, that's much better than before the fact. Like 3 years down the road, if this, in fact, the recruiting rankings were correct, congratulations on hoisting some sort of a trophy. But I don't know what the tangible impact of it is, though.
Yeah, I think it's good for attention in the off season and a good thing to talk about when there's no football going on. But, once preseason camp starts, that's when you find out who can actually play the game of football. And there's been a lot of top-rated guys who couldn't actually play college football, and a lot of guys like Chris Olave who were not, national top 50 players who end up going out in the first 15 picks of the NFL draft. So, it's kind of it's a great starting point to have the biggest, fastest, strongest X's and O's, but they also have to be able to play football to be able to justify that. So, I take it all with a grain of salt. Again, fill your needs, get quality people who you don't worry looking around in 3 or 4 years whether they're still going to be there or not. They're not chasing false idols. They're there for the right reasons. They're there, presumably to get an education and improve at football and potentially put themselves in position to play in the NFL. I mean, that's what you want from these guys. And, that's what you're setting out to fill spots 1 through 25 in every recruiting class with those people who have those 3 things in mind. So, if the people who rate these players like them, then so be it. If not, you have to trust that your coaches have gotten the best people that they could get to fill the spots that had to be filled. So, there are a lot of people in my chat who are up in arms about the 2026 quarterback recruiting. They had a bunch of great 2026 quarterbacks on campus for the camp, and right now they haven't got one. And they're all, like 8 of the top 10 quarterbacks for 2026 have committed elsewhere. Well, when you have 5 scholarship quarterbacks and 4 of them on paper are due back the following year, and one of them is Julian Sayin, and another one's Aaron Noland, and another, actually 5 of them, when you count Tavian St. Clair, would be on paper, and another one's Tavian St. Clair. Who are you expecting to lure, to fight with those 3 guys for playing time out of the 2026 class? Who are you expecting that you're going to land? You got 3 of the best 20 quarterbacks in the previous 2 cycles. I mean, who are you thinking is who in their right mind would come to Ohio State in 2026 to, swim upstream against those guys? So, it doesn't do any good to get upset about it or worry about it. It's understandable. They showed him the chalkboard. They said, we got, in all honesty, we got the nation's number 1 player come in next year, Tavian St. Clair. Yeah, he's going to be at your position. Yeah. Well, good luck to you. Yeah, it's kind of like, I'd pick up my ball and go to Georgia or somewhere else too. I mean, what do you people want? It doesn't happen by accident.
Go get him, Tiger.
Exactly.
And we've seen Tavian St. Clair. He was at 2 or 3 of the June camp days, and I think I said it here before, but Diabell, the 4 or 5-star quarterback that committed to Texas, was at Ohio State like 4 or 5 days before that, working out at camp. Tavian St. Clair would go first. Diabell would go second on all of their drills. And then like, less than a week later, he's like, I'm going to Texas. Like, I don't think these two things are unconnected, where you see like, who is the guy in front of in the class in front of me? It's that guy. Well, let's go to Texas instead and see what's going on there. And there is a guy that there have been several quarterbacks on campus, as Steve said, that worked out this past month and ended up committing to other schools. And I think Tavian St. Clair has a lot to do with it. Julian Sain probably has a lot to do with it. And sometimes you're just going to have to, skip a class. Not that they won't take one, but sometimes you have a class that ends up. They had Brock Glenn committed, last year, a year before that. Like sometimes you're not, fishing among the best, and you're going to get somebody a low 4-star guy, and you make do with it. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But it's hard to just get 5-star after 5-star after 5-star.
I think Mika has a good point there with Nathan Bernard. I think the player from Ashland, Worcester, somewhere up that way, Findlay, I don't know, somewhere northern Ohio. He's a good-looking player. Coaches have had him in camp. They know what they're getting with him. So if they do offer him and they do take him, then we'll see. That would be a potential get for 2016 or 2026 to take the Ohio guy to fill that spot.
But that's an Ohio guy who has big time offers as well. And so then it becomes do you want to be a Buckeye more than you want to play? And can you convince them that they can play at Ohio State when they haven't offered him to this point? Then I think that's a pretty good tell in terms of how they feel. So to then offer him and say, we think you can play, is kind of a tale of two stories there.